She walked back into the room where he had broken her. Not to beg, not to forgive, not to return. She walked back in wearing the gold she had built from the ashes he left behind, and beside her stood 3 children with his eyes. 4 years ago, the most feared mafia boss in Korea watched her dress burn and said nothing. Tonight, Seo Kang-jae would finally understand what he destroyed, and what she had built from the wreckage of him. If this story pulls you in, like this video, drop a comment with your city and let me see how far this story travels. Dumb. The ballroom at the Grand Hyatt Seoul smelled like money and ambition. Expensive perfume layered over cigarette smoke, and the faint metallic bite of champagne that had been poured too early and left too long in the glass. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across the crowd, and every surface gleamed with the deliberate excess of people who needed the world to know they had arrived. Seoul Fashion Week's closing gala was the kind of event that separated the industry's survivors from its casualties, and everyone inside that room understood they were being watched, evaluated, and filed away in someone else's calculations. Seo Kang-jae stood near the far end of the room with a glass of scotch he hadn't touched and a posture that discouraged conversation. He was 41 years old, lean in the way of men who had never in their lives fully relaxed, and dressed in a charcoal suit that had been cut to fit him and only him. His face was the kind that photographs well from a distance. Angular jaw, sharp cheekbones, eyes so dark they read as black under artificial light. Up close, there was something wrong with it. Not a scar, not a deformity. Something behind the surface, in the quality of his attention, that made people instinctively step back when he turned to look at them directly. He had not wanted to come tonight. He had come anyway, because the Black Serpent Syndicate's legitimate business holdings included 3 fashion houses with collections on next season's calendar, and his presence at this gala was the kind of soft power move his advisors had spent 2 weeks building the argument for. He had listened to the argument. He had agreed without enthusiasm. He had arrived at precisely the time he intended to arrive, declined every offer to escort him to a table, and positioned himself where he could see the entrance, the emergency exits, the main stage, and the clusters of conversation happening near the bar without appearing to surveil any of them. This was how Kang-jae moved through the world, watchful, contained, performing calm so thoroughly that most people around him had stopped questioning whether it was real. The problem, the thing he would not admit even to himself, was that tonight the calm was costing him more effort than usual. 3 weeks ago, his mother had called him. Madame Seo Myon did not call often. When she did, the calls were short, deliberate, and loaded with the kind of precision that had allowed her to survive 40 years inside the Seo family's machinery without being consumed by it. She had said 4 words before she hung up. She is coming back. Kang-jae had not slept well since. He told himself it was business pressure. The syndicate's eastern port operations were under review. 2 of his financial lieutenants were under surveillance by the National Tax Service. Jang Tae-sung, his oldest friend and closest advisor, had been making decisions without consultation again. Small ones, the kind that could be explained away individually but which, taken together, formed a pattern Kang-jae had not yet named because naming it would require him to act on it. He told himself any one of these things was reason enough for disrupted sleep. He was, in most matters, an honest man with himself. In this one, he was not. The crowd shifted near the entrance. A new current moved through the room, the specific ripple of attention that occurs when something genuinely unexpected walks through a door. Kang-jae felt it before he saw the cause. He had spent enough years in rooms where attention could become violence in under 4 seconds, to trust his body's reading of a crowd's energy, and what he felt now was not threat. It was something quieter and more destabilizing. Collective recognition. He turned. The entrance of the Grand Hyatt's main ballroom had double doors 12 feet high, and they had been opened fully, which meant that what walked through them walked through a frame that commanded the entire room's sightline. The lighting in the entry corridor was warm, amber gold, and she stood in the center of it, wearing a gown the color of midnight shot through with hammered gold thread. And the silence that fell over the ballroom was the kind that only happens when something genuinely stops people mid-sentence and mid-thought and mid-breath all at once. Kang-jae's scotch glass stopped halfway to a mouth he hadn't intended to raise it to. Nyla Brooks. 4 years. She was taller than he remembered, which was impossible and also absolutely true. She had always been tall, 5'10" in bare feet. But she was wearing heeled boots tonight that added 3 inches, and her posture had changed in a way that had nothing to do with footwear. She carried herself like a woman who had long since stopped making herself smaller to fit into other people's ideas of the space she was allowed to occupy. Her locks were pinned up in a crown arrangement threaded with fine gold wire that caught the light when she moved. And her face, God, her face, was the same face he had memorized and tried to unmemorize for 4 years without success. Wide-set dark eyes, a jaw that squared when she was angry, a mouth that gave very little away unless she decided to let it. She was giving nothing away now. And then the children walked in beside her. 2 girls and 1 boy, each small enough that Nyla's hands could reach down without fully extending and settle briefly on their shoulders before releasing. They were dressed in coordinated but not identical outfits, the girls in deep indigo, the boy in charcoal. And they moved with the slightly bewildered confidence of children who have been told to stand straight and not fidget and have decided to trust the adult giving the instruction. They could not have been more than 3 years old, perhaps closer to 4. The room was completely silent. Kang Jae looked at the children. He looked at their faces, and the scotch glass slipped from his hand. He caught it before it hit the floor. A reflex. 4 decades of controlled responses had made his body competent even when his mind went offline. But in the half-second between the slip and the catch, 3 people standing nearby saw it happen, and one of them, a fashion journalist whose instincts had made her career, immediately raised her phone. Kang Jae did not notice. He was still looking at the children, the boy's eyes, the girl on the left's jaw, the slope of the other girl's brow. He recognized every feature the way you recognize something that belongs to you when you find it somewhere you have no right to find it, with a shock that arrives before understanding does, an understanding that arrives before you are ready for it. They were his. The room began murmuring again, the silence cracking along invisible fault lines as people leaned toward each other and began the rapid exchange of speculation that would, within 20 minutes, become confirmed fact on every industry channel and entertainment feed in the country. But the murmuring reached Kang Jae from a distance, as though he were at the bottom of water, and the noise was happening at the surface above him. He was 4 years away from this room. He was in a different room, in a different season, standing at a different distance, watching orange light consume gold silk and telling himself he was doing the right thing. It's just a dress. He had actually said those words. He had watched her face when he said them. And then she had done the thing he had never in all his calculations anticipated. She had been completely, utterly quiet. No screaming, no weeping, no performance of devastation that he could have absorbed and managed and eventually redirected. She had simply looked at him with eyes that registered what he was, fully, finally, without illusion, and removed her wedding ring and placed it on the mantelpiece with the same deliberate care she gave to everything she made with her hands. And she had walked out of his house and out of his life, carrying his children inside her body, and he had let her go because he had told himself that was what strength looked like. He had been catastrophically wrong. Nyla had not looked at him yet. She was moving through the room now, and the crowd was parting, not out of social obligation, because Nyla Brooks did not operate at the level of society obligation anymore. That much was obvious from the gowns photographed and the names in the programs and the way every significant editor and buyer in the room was recalibrating their posture in her direction. The crowd parted because the crowd understood, in the way crowds sometimes understand things before individuals do, that this woman had arrived at the center of the room, and the center of the room was wherever she stood. The children moved with her, navigating adult legs and the hems of expensive fabric with the practiced agility of children who have learned to stay close. Kang Jae put his scotch glass on the nearest flat surface without looking at it. He began moving through the crowd. He did not consciously decide to do this. His body simply began doing it, the way it moved toward exits in emergencies or toward threats before his mind had fully classified them. He was threading through clusters of people who recognized him and stepped aside. And the distance between him and Nyla was closing, and he still did not have a plan. He had not had a plan in 4 years regarding Nyla Brooks. Every strategy he had drafted in the first year of her absence had been discarded because strategies require a clear objective, and he had never been able to determine what his objective actually was. She saw him when there were 12 feet between them. He knew the exact moment because her stride did not slow. She had too much control for that, but something changed in her face. The quality of her stillness shifted. A stillness that had been composed became a stillness that was being held in place by will rather than by ease. She said nothing. Neither did he, for 3 seconds that lasted considerably longer than that. Nyla! His voice came out level. He had not been confident it would. Kang Jae. Her voice was lower than he remembered. 4 years had done something to it, not roughened it, but settled it deeper in her chest, the way a voice settles when the person wearing it has stopped needing anyone's approval. The children were watching him with the frank, uncomplicated assessment of young children who have not yet learned to pretend they aren't looking at something. The boy had his head tilted slightly. One of the girls had her hand inside Nyla's, fingers linked. These are... He stopped. He did not know how to complete the sentence in a way that was true and also survivable. Yes, Nyla said. She did not offer elaboration. She did not need to. The boy pulled slightly on Nyla's other hand. Mama, he said quietly, not quite a question. Nyla looked down at him, and something moved across her face that was the most private thing Kang Jae had witnessed in years. A tenderness so deep and so completely focused that it excluded everything else in the room, including him, which was precisely the point. I know, baby, she said. Hang on. She looked back up at Kang Jae. This isn't the place, she said. No, he agreed. And I didn't come here for this. I know. Do you? It was not entirely a question. He absorbed that. The journalist with the phone was still in his peripheral vision. There were at least 8 other phones raised in their general direction, which meant that whatever happened in the next 60 seconds was going to be part of the public record by morning. He had navigated media exposure for 20 years. He had managed the optics of business disputes, criminal accusations, and 2 separate organized crime investigations without allowing anything to reach his face that he had not placed there deliberately. He could not fully account for what was on his face right now. I would like to speak with you, he said. Not tonight. Your timeline. Nyla looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked down at the children. Briefly, a check. The automatic inventory of a parent who has learned never to stop counting. And back at him. You'll hear from my lawyer, she said. And she moved past him, into the room, into the crowd that received her like a current receiving water it had been waiting for. And the children moved with her, and Kang Jae stood in the space she had vacated and understood that he was, for the first time in memory, completely lost. What? 4 years, 1 month, and 17 days earlier, Seo Kang Jae had been a man who believed he understood power. He had inherited a criminal syndicate at 27 when his father's heart had stopped mid-sentence during a negotiation in Busan. And he had spent the following 14 years making himself into the kind of leader that the Black Serpent Syndicate's enemies had nightmares about. He was not gratuitously cruel. Cruelty was inefficient and attracted unwanted attention. But he was thorough in the way of men who have decided that incompleteness is its own category of failure. When he made a decision, it stayed made. When he removed someone from his inner circle, they stayed removed. When he drew a line, nothing crossed it. He had believed until Nyla that this made him strong. Nyla Brooks had arrived in his life 3 weeks after her collection debuted at a pop-up event in Itaewon that had generated enough buzz to reach even his level of awareness, which was saying something, because Kang Jae's attention was not casually accessible. She had been 28, American-born, and Seoul-educated, the daughter of a Nigerian-American father and a Senegalese mother, and she designed clothes the way other people argued, with precision, with fury, with a point of view that refused to negotiate itself into palatability. He had attended the pop-up for reasons adjacent to business. One of the syndicate's legitimate holdings was considering acquiring a stake in an emerging fashion incubator, and he had watched her move through the crowd of people trying to talk to her, deflecting with a pleasantness that concealed, very inadequately, a total indifference to their approval. He had found her fascinating before he found her beautiful, which was the correct order. What followed had surprised him. He had not, prior to Nyla, been surprised by relationships. He had understood the mechanics of them too well. What people wanted from proximity to him, what they were willing to perform to maintain it, where their authentic edges ended and their strategic ones began. With Nyla, there had been no performance. She had been, from the first conversation in his car on the way to a dinner, she had accepted with visible reluctance exactly what she appeared. Direct, genuinely funny when she chose to be, allergic to small talk, capable of sustained silences that most people found uncomfortable, and that he found, against all expectations, restful. They had married 14 months after the pop-up. It had not been a conventional courtship, and it had not been a conventional wedding, and nothing about the 2 years that followed had been conventional, which was the point. Nyla did not want the version of his life that he showed the world. She wanted the actual one. The one with the arguments at 2 a.m. about decisions that mattered, the one with the silences that said things the words hadn't gotten to yet, the one where she could push back against him without calculating whether it was safe to do so. He had never had anyone in his life he could not intimidate, even slightly, into compliance. He had found it equal parts maddening and necessary. And then Yoon Hae-rin had entered the picture, and Kang Jae, who prided himself on seeing manipulation before it had finished being constructed, had failed, with astonishing completeness, to see it at all. Hae-rin was the kind of beautiful that required maintenance and resources and a specific quality of attention from men with money, and she had been in the periphery of the CO family's social circle for years. The daughter of a business ally, present at events, unremarkable in the way of people who have learned that the most effective invisibility is performed by standing in plain sight and being exactly what is expected. She had been friendly with Kang Jae's business associates. She had been pleasant at dinners. She had, without his noticing, made herself indispensable to several of the people whose opinions he respected. When Nyla's second collection began receiving international attention, when the calls started coming from Paris and New York and Milan, when the fashion editors began using her name in the same sentences as designers who had been building careers for decades, Hae-rin began working. She was subtle. She had to be, because Kang Jae was not a man whose mind was easily redirected. She did not make accusations. She planted suggestions, small observations, offered lightly and seemingly withdrawn before they could be examined. Isn't it interesting how much time she's spending with the international buyers? I suppose that's what success requires. You must be proud of her. It can't be easy for her to be in the spotlight when you prefer to stay out of it. She never said, "Your wife's success is making you look weak." She said, "You've always been so private, it must be an adjustment." Her name being everywhere. And Kang Jae, who was 40 years old and had never in his adult life been genuinely insecure about anything, discovered that insecurity did not announce itself. It arrived sideways, in the middle of the night, in the form of a thought you have before you've fully woken up, in which you tell yourself you don't believe, and which is still there 3 nights later, slightly louder. He had not talked to Nyla about it. This was the failure at the center of everything. Not the fire, not the dress, not even the words he'd said. The failure was that he had spent 4 months telling himself a story about his marriage that he had not once spoken aloud to his wife. Nyla had known something was wrong. She had said so, in her way, not with accusations or theatrics, but with the directness that was her default mode. "Talk to me. You've been somewhere else for weeks. Whatever it is, just say it." And he had said nothing because saying it would have required him to admit that he was afraid. And he had not, at 40 years old, with 20 years of criminal enterprise behind him, found a way to say that word out loud. The night of the fire had been a Tuesday in late November. Nyla had a collection preview the following morning. She had been working 18-hour days for 3 weeks, and the handcrafted gold silk gown, the centerpiece of what would have been the baby shower collection she was building, the piece she had started the month she learned she was pregnant, was nearly finished. She had been working on it for 11 months. He had seen her at 3 a.m. with gold thread looped through her fingers, stitching seams by lamplight because the quality of the light mattered. He had been in the garden when Hae-rin arrived. He had not invited her. That was the detail he returned to most often in the years that followed, the one that most clearly illustrated what had been done to him. Hae-rin's presence that night had been engineered before he understood it was happening. She had manufactured a business pretext through one of the syndicate's front offices, had arrived at the house with 2 of his senior men who vouched for the legitimacy of the visit, and Kang Jae, whose instincts were usually so reliable, had been so deep in the cold water of his own unexamined insecurities that his defenses had simply not been running at full capacity. He did not know exactly at what point in the evening Hae-rin had gone upstairs. He knew what he had seen when he heard the smell of smoke and came inside. The gown room, The converted bedroom Nyla had claimed as her studio was lit orange. The gold silk was on the frame where Nyla left it, and the fire had started at the hem and was working upward with the particular efficiency of fire that has been helped along. Hayrin was standing in the doorway of the room, her face perfectly arranged in an expression of alarm that he registered in some distant and unshouted part of his brain as slightly too composed. Her glass of wine was still in her hand. He had not moved. This was the thing he could not explain to himself, not in 4 years of trying. He had not moved. He had stood in the hallway and watched orange light consume 11 months of his wife's work, and the most fundamental, rational, human response to move, to act, to reach for water or a fire extinguisher or a phone had not come. Some other thing had been running in its place, something cold and stunned, and perhaps, in some part of him he would never fully acknowledge, something that in its confusion had let the fire keep burning for the 4 seconds too long that made all the difference. The smoke alarm screaming had broken it. By the time the fire was contained, the gown was destroyed, the frame was charred, the silk was gone. Hayrin had gone home, cleanly, no drama, the same way someone leaves a scene they have finished using. And then Nyla had come home. She had smelled the smoke from the front door. He had watched her register it, one breath, a blink, and then she had come up the stairs with a controlled urgency that was somehow more frightening than running would have been. She had stood in the doorway of the ruined room for a long time without speaking, long enough that the silence had its own shape. When she turned to look at him, something in her face had already closed. He should have said, "I'm sorry. I should have stopped it. I failed you." He should have said, "Something is wrong, and I don't know how to explain it, but I need you to hear me." He should have said anything that was real, what came out, and he would never fully understand the mechanism that produced it. The combination of guilt and defensiveness and the profound male incapacity to be witnessed in weakness, what came out was, "It's just a dress." The silence afterward was the loudest thing he had ever heard. Nyla had not cried. He had expected tears, not because he had a low opinion of her, but because he knew she had loved that gown the way she loved things she had built with sustained intention, and the loss of it should have broken something. Instead, what happened to her face was something he had no word for, a kind of arrival, as though she had spent months in motion and had finally, in this moment, reached a place she had not realized she was traveling toward. She walked to the mantelpiece. She removed her wedding ring. She placed it there with a steadiness that was its own indictment, and she walked out of the house. He had stood in the hallway and listened to the front door close, and then he had sat down on the floor of the hallway with his back against the wall and his hands on his knees like a man who had just survived something and was waiting to find out how much damage had been done. He had not known then that she was 6 months pregnant. He had not known that she was carrying 3 children. He had not known that walking out of his house was not the end of her story, but the beginning of a different one that had nothing to do with him, that she would build from the ground up with her own hands, in the dark, alone. He had not known any of it, and the thing that sat in his chest in the years that followed, the thing that was heavier than guilt, sharper than regret, and more permanent than either, was not the question of what she had done without him. It was the knowledge that when it mattered most, he had watched something precious burn and told himself it was something he could afford to lose. The gala was still running when Kang Jae found his way out of the ballroom. Not fleeing, he did not flee. But there was a limit to how long he could remain in the room where she was without every carefully maintained surface of his composure developing cracks that other people would notice. He found a corridor near the service entrance and stood in it with his phone in his hand and his jacket unbuttoned and breathed. His phone had 12 missed notifications. He ignored them. He called his mother. Madame Seomyeon answered on the second ring, which meant she had been awake and waiting, which meant she had known this was going to happen tonight, and had chosen not to warn him beyond those 4 words 3 weeks ago. "You knew," he said. A pause. Not discomfort. His mother did not do discomfort over the phone, and barely in person. The pause of someone deciding how much of what they know to give. "I knew she had registered for the gala," his mother said. "I did not know about the children until tonight." "Did not know or did not tell me?" Another pause. Longer. "Kang Jae. Which is it?" His mother's voice when she spoke again was the voice she used when she was deciding to tell a truth she had been maintaining a different version of. He had heard it 3 times in his life. The last time had been the morning of his father's funeral. "I've been in contact with Neela," she said, "for the past 3 years." The corridor was quiet. Somewhere behind the service door there was the clatter of catering staff clearing plates. Kang Jae did not move. "You were in contact with her," he said carefully, "for 3 years. She needed help after she left. She was pregnant and alone, and she did not want you to know where she was. I respected that. You are my mother. I am also those children's grandmother." A pause. "And I am not entirely certain, my son, that what you needed 3 years ago was to be found by her rather than to sit with what you had done." He pressed the heel of his hand against the wall. The plaster was cold. "She doesn't want to speak to me," he said. "She said I'd hear from her lawyer." "Then you will hear from her lawyer. I have 3 children I have never met." "Yes. And you—" He stopped. There was too much at the end of that sentence. He chose the part that was most immediate. "Why tonight? Why the gala?" His mother was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, there was something in her voice that was as close as she would ever get to satisfaction. "Because," she said, "Nyla Brooks does not hide anymore. She has not hidden for 2 years. She is the most talked about designer at this week's shows. Her face has been on every major industry publication. She decided when she was ready to be seen. Tonight she was ready. And the children. She decided they were ready too." Kang Jae closed his eyes. He thought about the boy's tilted head, the girl's hand inside Nyla's fingers, the way his children had looked at him, not with hostility or with hurt, but with the wide, uncomplicated curiosity of children who have not been told to feel any particular way about a man they had never met, and who therefore simply, openly, looked. "What are their names?" he said. His mother told him. His mother. He stood in the service corridor of the Grand Hyatt Seoul, with his eyes still closed and his hand pressed flat against a cold plaster wall, and he heard the names of his children for the first time, and something that had been constructed very carefully inside his chest over 4 years. Every brick of it placed deliberately, every seam reinforced, began without warning or permission to come apart. He did not make a sound. He stood there, and he let it come apart quietly, the way he did everything, and he stared at the back of his own eyelids and understood that whatever kind of man he had been building himself into for the past 41 years, the version he had relied on, the version that held lines and made decisions and watched things burn rather than admit he was afraid, that version was not going to be sufficient for what came next. Somewhere in the ballroom 30 meters away, his children were navigating a crowd of people who were nothing to them, pressing close to their mother's side, trusting the woman who had built herself from nothing and brought them into a world that was asking her to be extraordinary, which she was, which she had always been, which he had looked at directly and somehow managed not to see. His phone buzzed, a message from Jang Tae-sung. "Saw the photos, we need to talk." Kang Jae looked at the message for a long moment. He put the phone in his pocket without responding. Whatever Tae-sung wanted to talk about could wait. Everything, right now, could wait. Except the question of what kind of man you could still become at 41, when the evidence of everything you had failed was standing in a ballroom wearing his eyes and had not yet been given a reason to know his name. The message from Tae-sung was still sitting unread in Kang Jae's pocket when he got home. The house was too large and too quiet, in the way that large, quiet houses become when they have held a life that is no longer there. Kang Jae had not redecorated since Neela left. He had told himself this was because he had no interest in interior design and the house functioned adequately as it was. The truth, which he did not examine directly, was that changing anything would have required him to make a decision about what the space was now, and he had not been ready to make that decision. So the house remained. Her color choices on the walls, her preferred lamps in the corners, the kitchen organized in the particular illogical to everyone else logic of a woman who cooked by instinct rather than by recipe and needed her tools in the places her hands already knew to reach. He poured 2 fingers of scotch and did not drink it. He sat at the kitchen island with his jacket folded over the back of the stool beside him and his sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he looked at the countertop and thought about 3 names: Ji-woo, Ji-an, Ji-hoon. His mother had said them in the order of birth. The girls first, then the boy. She had said them simply, without drama, the way you say names that have existed long enough to be unremarkable to the person who knows them, and the unremarkableness of it. The fact that these names had been in daily use for nearly 4 years while he had been living inside a version of reality that did not include them was the part that kept arriving in his chest like something thrown hard. His children had names he had not given them. They had birthdays he had not attended. They had first words he had not heard, first steps on floors he had not been standing on, first nightmares that someone other than him had sat up to address. They had a life that was complete and coherent and did not contain him, and he had built that absence himself, with his own hands, in the space of one sentence spoken in a hallway in November. It's just a dress. He pressed his thumb against the rim of the Scotch glass hard enough to feel the edge. His phone buzzed again. Tae-sung. A second message. Kang Jae. The photos are everywhere. This is a problem we need to manage tonight. He read it this time. He read it twice. Then he set the phone face down on the counter and stared at the wall. Tae-sung's instinct to classify what had happened tonight as a problem requiring management was so precisely the wrong instinct that it told Kang Jae something he had been edging toward for months without fully arriving at. You could measure a person's actual priorities by what they reached for first under pressure. Tae-sung had looked at photographs of Kang Jae's children appearing publicly for the first time, and his first move had been optics. Not, "Are you all right?" Not, "What do you need?" Not even the simpler and more honest, "What does this mean?" Just, "This is a problem we need to manage." Kang Jae turned the phone face up and called him. Tae-sung picked up before the second ring. "Finally, I've been—" "Come to the house," Kang Jae said. A pause. "Now?" "Now." He hung up. Jang Tae-sung arrived 40 minutes later, which meant he had not come directly from wherever he'd been and had taken enough time to prepare himself. Kang Jae noticed this the way he noticed most things, without commenting on it, filing it in the part of his mind that cataloged things that would become relevant later. Tae-sung was 42, a year older than Kang Jae, and he had been inside the Seo family's orbit since they were children. The son of a loyal lieutenant, absorbed into Kang Jae's household at 12 when his own father died in a dispute that the official record listed as a traffic accident. He was broad where Kang Jae was lean, with a face that was fundamentally trustworthy looking. Open features, a ready smile, the kind of appearance that made people feel they were being seen warmly. He had used this face extremely well for 40 years. He came into the kitchen and looked at the untouched scotch, and then at Kang Jae's face, and sat down on the stool across the island without being invited. "Tell me what you're thinking," he said. "I want to hear what you're thinking first." Tae-sung spread his hands on the counter. Reasonable gesture. The gesture of a man who has nothing to hide and wants that to be visible. "I'm thinking that by 6 a.m. there will not be a single person in this country who doesn't know you have 3 children you've never met. I'm thinking the National Tax Service surveillance team is going to find this extremely interesting from a biographical angle. I'm thinking your position with the Eastern operations depends on the people running those operations believing you are in complete control of your life, and tonight makes that very difficult to argue." Ah Shin-min. Kang Jae looked at him. "That's what you're thinking." "Yes." "Nothing else." Tae-sung met his eyes steadily. The steadiness was very good. It had always been very good. "What else should I be thinking?" "That I saw my children for the first time tonight. 3 of them. That they are 3 years old and they were at a fashion gala in Seoul, and I didn't know they existed until my mother gave me 4 words 3 weeks ago." Kang Jae's voice was level. He had decided on the drive home that whatever happened in this conversation, he would not lose his voice. That seems like the kind of thing a person who has been my closest advisor for 20 years might lead with. Something moved in Tae-sung's face. It was quick, a flicker in the steadiness, there and gone in under a second. And a different version of Kang Jae, the version from 6 months ago, might have attributed it to discomfort at being called out for prioritizing the wrong thing. The version sitting at this kitchen island at 1:30 in the morning with 3 names he hadn't known this morning sitting in his chest like anchors. That version read it differently. That version filed it. "You're right," Tae-sung said. "I'm sorry. Are you all right?" "No." "What do you need?" "Information. What do you know about how she came back? Who helped her? Where she's been? How she built what she built?" Tae-sung's expression shifted into something that looked like careful thought. "Not much. She disappeared from public record for about 18 months after she left. Then she started appearing in trade publications under a new label, NYLA Studio. Small collections at first, then bigger. She got a major backer somewhere in the second year, but the financial trail is private structured, so I couldn't. He stopped. Kang Jae had not moved, but something in his stillness changed quality. You looked into her, he said. I kept tabs. You should know what you're... I never asked you to look into her. No. Taesung's jaw moved slightly. I made that call on my own. I thought it was relevant. And you didn't tell me what you found. You were not, at that time, in a state to receive that kind of information productively. The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. From somewhere outside came the distant sound of a car on the road below, gone in 3 seconds. Kang Jae stood up. He walked to the window above the sink and looked out at the garden where the outdoor lights threw yellow pools across the stone path, and the dark beyond the path was complete. The backer, he said, the one who funded the second year. You said you couldn't follow the trail. It's private structured, like I said. Who structures that kind of privacy in this industry? A pause slightly too long. Several people could. Who did? Kang Jae, Taesung. He did not raise his voice. He did not turn from the window. We have been doing this for 20 years. You know what my voice sounds like when I am asking and what it sounds like when I am telling you I already know the answer and need you to confirm it so I don't have to keep looking at you and wondering why you won't. The silence this time was longer. Outside, the garden lights hummed. Your mother, Taesung said finally. Kang Jae closed his eyes for 2 seconds, then opened them. My mother funded Nyla's company. Starting about 8 months after Nyla left. The initial structure was through one of the family's private trusts, the Jeonju Holding, the one your father set up for non-operational assets. It was done quietly. I found it 14 months ago. And you said nothing. I thought, what? He turned now. What did you think? Taesung looked at him across the kitchen island with an expression that Kang Jae was reading in real time and finding increasingly difficult to reconcile with the face he had known for 3 decades. There was something there that was not quite guilt and not quite defiance. Something more complicated than either. Something that had its own agenda. I thought it was information that would be more useful at the right moment, Taesung said. The sentence landed in the room and sat there. More useful at the right moment. Not more useful when you were ready to hear it. Not more useful when Nyla had decided what she wanted. More useful. The passive framing, the unattached comparative, at a moment determined by someone other than Kang Jae. More useful as a piece on a board rather than a fact between friends. Kang Jae looked at the man who had been his closest friend since childhood. He looked at him for a long time. Get out of my house, he said. Taesung stood. He picked up his jacket from the back of the stool. His face had settled into an expression of wounded dignity that was, Kang Jae now understood with the cold clarity of a thing finally seen, a performance like most of his expressions had been. Performances very well rehearsed over decades. You're upset, Taesung said. I understand that. Call me when... Call me. I will not be calling you. Kang Jae's voice had not changed volume or temperature. It was the same level tone he had used all night. I want you to hear that clearly. I will not be calling you. I will be having a different conversation with you, in a different setting, when I have had time to understand the full shape of what you've been doing. But tonight you will leave my house, and you will not come back to it. Taesung looked at him. For a fraction of a second, less than a second, a sliver, the warmth dropped entirely from his face. What was underneath it was flat and still, and had no interest whatsoever in being witnessed. Then the warmth came back. Of course, he said pleasantly. Take the time you need. He walked out. Kang Jae listened to his footsteps cross the hallway, listened to the front door open and close, listened to the sound of the car starting in the drive and pulling away. Then he turned back to the window and stood there in the kitchen light with the garden dark outside and his untouched scotch on the counter behind him. He thought about 14 months. Taesung had known for 14 months that Madame Seo was funding Nyla's company. He had known, therefore, that Nyla was alive and building and supported and in ongoing contact with the Seo family. He had known this and said nothing. He had classified it as information to be deployed at the right moment. The right moment for whom? That was the question that was beginning to form its full shape in the back of Kang Jae's mind. The question that had been assembling itself in pieces for months. The unexplained decisions, the slight misalignments in the financial reports, the two lieutenants who had shifted their primary communications through Tae Sung's office rather than directly to him. Small things, individually explicable, collectively forming a pattern he had been looking at without naming, because naming it meant acknowledging that the man he trusted most had been, for an undetermined period of time, building something that ran alongside Kang Jae's life rather than inside it. He picked up his phone and called his mother back. She answered on the first ring this time. "The Jeonju Trust," he said. A pause, so shorter than the previous ones. "You spoke to Tae Sung." "He told me. 14 months ago he found the funding structure and said nothing." Kang Jae moved away from the window and sat back down at the island. "How long have you known he was watching her?" "I suspected it for 2 years. I confirmed it 8 months ago." "Mother, I needed to understand what he intended to do with it before I gave you information that would change how you handled him." Her voice was measured, deliberate, the voice of someone who has been running a longer game than the one currently visible. "Tae Sung has been positioning himself inside your operations for 3 years, Kang Jae, not aggressively, not in ways that would trigger the kind of response that would require him to expose his hand too early, quietly, systematically. The Eastern Port Review that's giving you trouble. 2 of the 3 reviewers have financial relationships with entities Tae Sung controls." The kitchen light felt suddenly very bright. "The NTS surveillance," Kang Jae said slowly, "was not random." He sat with that for a moment. The refrigerator hummed. The garden was dark outside. "He brought the surveillance on us." "Not directly. Through 3 intermediaries over 18 months. I have the documentation. I've been building it." "Why didn't you—" He stopped. He knew why. The same reason she hadn't warned him about Nyla until 3 weeks ago. The same reason she had told him about the trust in the manner and timing she had chosen. His mother was a woman who understood that information released too early was information that could be reacted to and therefore countered. She had been waiting until the full picture could be delivered in a form that left no room for Tae Sung to maneuver. "The gala tonight," he said. "Nyla coming back publicly. That was part of it." Nyla made her own decision about when to return to public life. She does not know about Tae Sung's activities, but yes, her return creates a context in which certain documents I have prepared will be received very differently than they would have been a month ago. Kang Jae pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. He thought about Hae-rin's face in the doorway of the burning room, the too composed expression, the wineglass still in her hand. Hae-rin, he said, was not acting independently. His mother's voice was flat and careful, in the way of a person delivering something they have held for a long time. She was introduced to our circle through Tae Sung. Her access to our household that night was facilitated through clearances he approved. I do not believe he told her to burn the dress. I believe she was a person he had cultivated and positioned, and what she chose to do with that position on that particular night was her own decision. But the opportunity was his construction. The silence in the kitchen was the loudest silence of the night. Kang Jae sat very still. He thought about the year before the fire. The small observations Hae-rin had placed in his ear like seeds. Never accusations, just suggestions. Isn't it interesting? You must be proud. It must be an adjustment. He thought about who she had been talking to before she talked to him. He thought about how a man who wanted to destabilize the most important relationship in your life might go about doing it. If you were patient enough and smart enough and had spent 30 years learning exactly which angles of your psychology were accessible. He thought about the night of the fire and the hallway afterward, and his wife's face as she placed her wedding ring on the mantelpiece. He thought about 3 children who were 3 years old and had his eyes and had names he'd learned tonight and had never heard his voice say their names back. He stood up abruptly. The stool scraped back loud against the tile. "I need the documentation," he said. "Everything you have on Tae Sung. All of it. I'll send it tonight. And I need—" He stopped. He pressed his hand flat on the counter. "I need Nyla to know that what happened 4 years ago was not only my failure. She deserves to know that she was targeted, that the fire wasn't—" He stopped again. that there were forces she doesn't know about. His mother was quiet for a moment. Nyla is a woman who built an empire while raising 3 children alone, she said carefully. She does not need your explanations to understand her own strength. But yes, she deserves the full truth. Whether that changes anything between you, that is not a decision you get to make for her. I know that. Do you? He did not answer that one. He stood in the kitchen of the house that still had Nyla's color choices on the walls and her lamp placement in the corners, and he looked at the untouched scotch on the counter, and he understood, clearly and without the buffer of self-deception, that what he had believed for 4 years, that he was a man who had made a catastrophic mistake born of weakness and pride, was true and also incomplete. He had been a man who had been carefully and deliberately moved into position to make that mistake. That did not make the mistake less his. The hand that had not moved, the voice that had said those 4 words, the door he had not chased her through, these were still his, completely, and no amount of Tai Sung's machinations changed the fact that a better version of himself would not have been accessible to those machinations in the first place. But Nyla had walked out of his house believing she had married a man who, under pressure, had simply not loved her enough. She had built 4 years of independence on the foundation of that belief. She deserved to know that the pressure had been engineered. His phone buzzed, a number he didn't recognize. He answered. Mr. Seo, a woman's voice, professional, clipped. My name is attorney Shinji Young. I represent Nyla Brooks. She asked me to contact you tonight. She wants to establish ground rules for any future communication before the press cycle on tonight's photographs becomes unmanageable. A pause. She also wants you to know that she is aware you spoke with your mother this evening, and that whatever your mother told you, her position has not changed. Kang Jae absorbed this. What is her position? He said. Her children are not a negotiation. Any contact you wish to have with them will be structured, supervised, and on her timeline. She is not interested in your explanations, your apologies, or your remorse. She is interested only in what you are willing to do, consistently, over time. The last sentence landed with the particular weight of something that had been thought about very carefully before being said. What you are willing to do, consistently, over time. Not what he felt, not what he intended, not what he was sorry for, what he was willing to do. Tell her, Kang Jae said, that I understand the terms. She'll be in touch through this office. Attorney Shin paused again, a beat of silence that felt like it had been placed there intentionally. One more thing. Ms. Brooks asked me to tell you that Yoon Hae-rin contacted her 3 days ago. Hae-rin claims to have information about the night of the fire that Ms. Brooks does not yet have. Ms. Brooks has not met with her. She wanted you to know that this contact occurred before she decides how to respond to it. The kitchen floor was very solid under Kang Jae's feet. He was aware of it the way you become aware of the ground when something above you begins to shift. Hae-rin had contacted Nyla 3 days before the gala. 3 days before Nyla walked back into public life with his children beside her. The timing was not accidental. Nothing, he was understanding now with a clarity that had the cold quality of water on a face that has been too long in the heat, had been accidental for a very long. The documentation arrived at 2:47 a.m. Kang Jae was still at the kitchen island when his phone lit up with his mother's transfer. An encrypted file package routed through the family's private legal channel, the kind of structure used for things that could not afford to be intercepted. He opened it on his laptop and read for 90 minutes without moving except to turn pages. By 4:15 a.m., he had a complete picture of the last 3 years of his life that was almost entirely different from the one he had been living inside. He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. Jang Tae-sung had begun his restructuring of the Black Serpent Syndicate's legitimate business holdings not 3 years ago, as Kang Jae had estimated, but 4 years and 2 months ago. The timeline in his mother's documentation was precise and sourced. Shell company registrations, wire transfers, board appointment records, and 3 signed testimonials from syndicate financial officers who had been quietly approached by Madame Seo over the past 18 months and who had, after careful consideration of their own legal exposure, decided that cooperation was preferable to proximity to whatever Tae-sung was building 4 years and 2 months ago, which placed the beginning of Tae-sung's restructuring at approximately the same time that Kang Jae and Nyla had announced the pregnancy. Kang Jae put his hand flat on the table and looked at it. He thought about what his mother had said. She was introduced to our circle through Tae Sung. Her access to our household that night was facilitated through clearances he approved. He thought about the timeline. Tae Sung had begun moving against the syndicate at the exact moment that Kang Jae's personal life became most vulnerable. When a man is expecting 3 children, his attention divides. His priorities shift. The calculations he makes about risk change because the cost of catastrophic failure has changed. It now includes people he has not yet met, but whom he has already, on some fundamental level, decided to protect. Tae Sung had known this, had known Kang Jae better than almost anyone alive, had spent 30 years studying the exact architecture of how Kang Jae's mind worked and where its load-bearing walls were. The pregnancy had not been coincidence. It had been the signal. And Haerin had been the instrument. Kang Jae closed the laptop. He stood up and walked to the sink and ran cold water over his wrists, the way he had learned to do in his 20s when his body needed to be told the emergency was not yet at the point of physical response. He stood there for a moment with the water running and his jaw tight and his eyes open and level, looking at the faucet, not at anything behind it. Then he dried his hands and called his head of security. Check. He drove to Haerin's apartment building himself. He had 2 men follow at distance, not beside him, because what he was doing required a particular quality of privacy. And he rode the elevator to the 14th floor of the Hanam-dong high-rise, with his hands in his jacket pockets and his face doing the thing it did when he had made a decision, and the decision had its own momentum now, and the only variable remaining was how the next conversation would go. He knocked. There was a long pause, long enough that he knew she was awake on the other side of the door, checking the peephole, doing the arithmetic of whether opening it was worse than not opening it. At 4:45 in the morning, Seo Kang Jae at your door was a calculation with no comfortable answer. The door opened. Yoon Hae-rin had been beautiful for so long that it had become structural. The architecture of her face was arranged in a way that produced a specific effect on first impression, regardless of context or preparation, and even now, barefoot in a silk robe with her hair down, and something that might have been fear or might have been performance running just under the surface of her expression, the effect functioned. She knew it did. She had always known. The awareness of it was visible in the fraction of a second before she spoke. The tiny adjustment of posture, the chin lifted just enough. "Kang Jae?" she said. Not surprised. He had expected that. "You contacted Nyla," he said. 3 days ago." She stepped back from the door. Not an invitation, so more of a concession, the body acknowledging before the mind committed. He walked in. The apartment was expensive and precisely arranged, the kind of space that communicated taste without revealing anything personal about the person living in it. He had been here twice before, years ago, and it looked exactly the same. No accumulation, no evidence of the random, lived-in quality of a space someone actually inhabited with their full self. Everything curated, everything controlled. He stood in the center of the living room and did not sit down. "What did you tell her?" he said. Haerin pulled the robe tighter at her collar. The gesture was the most unguarded thing about her. "I told her I had information about the fire, about what really happened." "And what really happened in your version?" She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't fully read, something that moved between calculation and something older and less managed underneath it. "You already know," she said. "I want to hear you say it. Kang Jae, say it." The room was quiet. Outside Seoul at 4:45 a.m. was the specific silence of a city that never fully stops but drops to a frequency too low to be heard from 14 floors up with the windows closed. Haerin sat down on the edge of the white sofa. She looked at her hands for a moment. When she looked back up, the calculation was gone from her face. What was left was something that, in a different context and a different person, might have been called exhaustion. "Taesung told me what he needed," she said. "He needed Nyla gone. He needed her gone before the triplets were born, so there was no family structure for you to anchor to. He said if she stayed, if the children were born into your household, you would consolidate around them, around her. He said it would make you immovable." A pause. He wasn't wrong about that. "So you burned the dress." "I started the fire." Her voice was flat. A woman reciting a fact. I used a lighter and a glass of accelerant from the bar cart in the studio, and I held the flame to the hem. It took about 4 seconds to catch. The matter-of-factness of it hit differently than anger would have. Anger had a human temperature. This was something else. Kang Jae looked at the woman sitting on the white sofa and felt, for the first time in the years since that night, the specific quality of grief that arrives when you understand that a catastrophe you have been blaming yourself for was, in part, a performance stage for your consumption. "And what did you get," he said, "for doing it?" "A 30% stake in the Busan Distribution Holdings, transferred the following March through the Jeonju restructuring." She paused. "I want you to know that I understood what I was doing. I'm not going to tell you I was manipulated. Taesung gave me an option, and I chose it." "Why are you telling Nyla now?" Heron looked at the floor. Her foot moved slightly. A small, restless press of toes against the carpet, the kind of movement that happens below the level of conscious control. "Because she's back, and because what I thought this was business. I thought it was a play inside a business dispute, and she would go, and eventually she would rebuild somewhere, and the children weren't supposed to." She stopped. The sentence had run out of a direction she was willing to go. "I didn't know she was pregnant when I did it." She was visibly 6 months pregnant. "I didn't know it was triplets." The distinction she was trying to make was too small to carry the weight she was putting on it. Kang Jae watched her try to carry it and looked away. "You told Nyla you had information," he said, "but you haven't met with her yet." "No." "Why contact her 3 days before the gala?" Hae-rin looked up. "Because Taesung told me to." The apartment's silence became a different quality of silence. Kang Jae turned to look at her fully. "Say that again." 3 weeks ago, Taesung came to me. He told me Nyla was planning to return publicly. He said I should contact her before the gala. Tell her I had information. Make sure she knew before she walked back into the spotlight. Hae-rin's jaw was tight. He said it would destabilize her, make her uncertain, walk back into the most important night of her career carrying the weight of not knowing what I knew. "He used you to shake her before her own comeback." "Yes." "And you did it." A pause barely long enough to be a pause. "Yes." Kang Jae had been standing with his hands in his jacket pocket since he came in. He removed them now and crossed his arms over his chest, not in the body language of defense, but of a man who needs something to hold himself in place while he processes an architectural shift in his understanding of a situation. Taesung had known about the gala, had known Nyla was coming back, and 3 days before it, he had deployed Hae-rin, the one person in the world whose contact would guarantee maximum psychological disruption, to make sure Nyla arrived at her own triumphant return, carrying an open question about the worst night of her life. The man had been trying to destabilize Nyla even now, even after 4 years, even after she was no longer in Kang Jae's house or his life, which meant Nyla was not incidental to Taesung's current play. She was still a variable he was actively managing. "What else did he tell you to do?" Kang Jae said. "That's all." Hae-rin. She flinched, genuinely, not a performance, a real movement of the muscles around her eyes. "He said if Nyla met with me and I gave her the full story about the fire, about him, I should include something else. He gave me a document, a financial record." She stood up and moved to the bedroom door, disappeared for a moment, came back with an envelope. She held it out. He took it, opened it. It was a record of a wire transfer. From a holding company he recognized, one of the Seo family's legitimate entertainment subsidiaries, to an account in Nyla's name, dated 6 weeks after she left, for an amount large enough to constitute, on its surface, a payoff. His mother's handwriting was not on it. The authorization signature was not his. The account structure was not one his family used. But the holding company name was Seo, and the account was Nyla's. And on paper, without the context of what he now knew about the Jeonju Trust restructuring, it looked exactly like a man paying his wife to disappear quietly and never come back. "This is fabricated," he said. "I know that. Taesung made this. He has someone inside your financial compliance office. He's been able to generate documents on Seo letterhead for at least 2 years. Hae-rin's voice was steady, but her hands, when she pressed them together, were not. He wanted me to show this to Nyla as part of my testimony, so that even when she got the truth about the fire, even when she finally understood that what happened that night wasn't entirely your failure, she would walk away believing you had paid her off, that you had engineered her exit as cleanly as everything else. Kang Jae looked at the document in his hands. He looked at it for a long time. The fabrication was good. It was not perfect. He could see, now that he was looking for them, 3 structural errors in the account routing that someone with forensic financial knowledge could identify. But it was good enough to create doubt. Good enough that a woman who had spent 4 years building her understanding of that night around a specific set of facts might, upon seeing this, feel the ground shift under everything she had constructed. Taesung had been going to let Hae-rin deliver a partial truth as a delivery mechanism for a devastating lie. Hae-rin's confession, the fire, the arrangement, Taesung's role, would make Nyla open, would crack the sealed version of that night she had been living with. And then, in that open and newly vulnerable place, Taesung's fabricated document would land and tell her, even the man you thought simply failed you was more calculated than that. Even his silence was purchased. It would not destroy Nyla. Kang Jae was clear-eyed enough about her to know that. But it would make reconciliation, any version of a future in which he was allowed to know his children, and she did not have to hold a story about him that was constructed entirely of his failures, functionally impossible. That was the point. Taesung did not need Nyla destroyed. He needed her and Kang Jae permanently, irrevocably separated. He needed Kang Jae to remain the man Nyla believed him to be. The man who had watched something burn and said it was just a dress and then paid for her silence. Because that man was isolated. That man had no claim on his children, no moral standing, no family structure to anchor to. That man was exactly as movable as Taesung needed him to be. Kang Jae set the document on the glass coffee table. "Why are you telling me this?" he said, instead of going through with it. Hae-rin looked at him. For the first time since he had walked in, she looked like a person rather than a position. It was not comfortable to look at. "Because I've been doing Taesung's work for 4 years and I have nothing to show for it except a stake in a distribution company that he's been quietly devaluing for 8 months, and whatever I thought I was building by being useful to him, I don't have it." Her voice had dropped. "And because those children at the gala tonight, I saw the photographs." A pause. "I didn't know about them. I knew she was pregnant. I didn't know they were. I didn't think about what they would be. That they would be actual people." The sentence was inadequate. She seemed to know it was. She didn't try to improve it. "I need to go to Nyla," Kang Jae said. "Taesung will know you've been here." "I know. He has surveillance on this building. He probably has it on yours." She hesitated. "He told me 3 days ago that if I deviated from the plan, he would make sure the full financial record of my arrangement with him became public. My involvement in the fire. All of it." A pause. "I'm going to lose everything anyway. I know that. I just decided I'd rather lose it having done the one thing that might—" She stopped again. The sentence didn't have an ending she could reach. Kang Jae picked up the fabricated document and put it in his jacket pocket. Then he looked at Hae-rin one more time, a long look, without warmth but without cruelty. The look of a man taking a final inventory of something he is closing a chapter on. "You should call a lawyer today," he said. "Not mine. Your own. And you should not speak to Taesung again without that lawyer present." She nodded. He walked to the door. His hand was on the handle when she spoke. "Kang Jae." Her voice was different. Small in a way her voice had never been in the years he'd known her. The night of the fire. When you didn't move. When you stood there. A pause. "I thought you knew what I was doing. I thought you'd made a choice." He stood with his hand on the door handle and his back to her. "I didn't know," he said. "I stood there because I was—" The word was there. The actual word. He had not said it out loud in 41 years. He said it now, in a Hanam-dong apartment at 5 a.m. to a woman who had helped destroy his marriage, because the practice of saying true things seemed at this moment to be one of the few tools he had left. I was afraid. Of what her success meant. Of what I'd become if she outgrew me. Of how small that made me. A pause. "I didn't move because I was afraid, and because Taesung had spent a year making me feel like I had something to be afraid of. but the fear was mine. He didn't manufacture that. Machintam. He opened the door. The children's names are Ji-woo, Jian, and Ji-hoon, he said, in case you wanted to know what you actually did that night. He closed the door behind him. He called his mother from the elevator. She answered immediately. He had stopped being surprised by this. Taesung has a fabricated financial document, he said. SEO letterhead, account in Nyla's name, structured to look like a payoff. He has someone inside financial compliance. I need you to find out who, and I need it locked down before morning. His mother was silent for 3 seconds. The silence of someone recalibrating a timeline. He's moving faster than I thought, she said. He knew Nyla was coming back. He's known the whole time. Whatever you've been preparing against him, he's been preparing against us at the same speed. Kang Jae stepped out of the elevator into the building's lobby. The security desk was empty. Through the glass doors, his car sat in the pre-dawn dark. I need to go to Nyla before he does, before Haren's contact becomes something he can use. Nyla won't see you without her lawyer present. I know. I need Attorney Shin's number. At 5 a.m. Yes. A pause, then. Kang Jae, whatever you say to her, you cannot go in there trying to manage this. She will see it. She sees everything. I know that too. What are you going to say? He pushed through the glass doors into the cold morning air. The sky was the specific dark blue of 5 a.m. in late autumn, the color that comes just before the black starts breaking and everything is briefly, purely, a single shade of almost morning. His breath fogged. The city below was quiet in a way it would not be in 2 hours. The truth, he said, all of it, in the order it happened, without... He stopped, rephrased. Without trying to make myself look better than I was inside it. His mother was quiet for a moment. She may not believe you, she said. I know. She may believe you and still not... It may not change anything, Kang Jae. You understand that. The truth doesn't... I know. His voice was very quiet. I'm not going there for what it changes. I'm going because she deserves to have it. Because Taesung spent 4 years making sure she didn't. And because if I let her keep living inside a version of that night that he helped construct, then I'm still... He stopped. Found it. I'm still letting him use her. And I am done letting anyone use her. The morning was very cold and very still around him. He got in the car. His phone buzzed in his hand. Not his mother. A different number. One he recognized as belonging to the Eastern Port Operations Director. At 5 a.m. On the night of the gala. On the same night, Haerin had called him with Taesung's document, and his mother had revealed the full scope of 3 years of internal restructuring. He stared at the incoming call. The Port Operations Director answered only to Kang Jae directly, had done so for 9 years. There was no scenario in which this call was routine, and there was only one scenario in which it landed at this precise moment on this precise night that made sense with everything else he answered the call. Mr. Seo. The Port Operations Director's voice was tight in the specific way of a man who has been awake too long and has run out of ways to frame bad news as anything other than what it is. We have a problem at the Incheon facility. 3 of our primary container locks have been flagged by Customs Authority for emergency inspection tonight. They're on site now. Kang Jae's hand tightened on the phone. Which containers? 7, 12, and 19. The ones carrying the Busan textile consignment. The Busan textile consignment was not textiles. Everyone in the relevant chain of command understood this, and no one said it out loud. It was the Eastern Port Operations' most significant active movement. 3 months in planning, 2 months in transit, the kind of logistics that required the particular calibration of officials, timing windows, and deniable documentation that Kang Jae's operation had spent years perfecting. If Customs Authority was on site tonight, with emergency flagging authority, someone had given them a specific tip with specific container numbers. How many officers? Kang Jae said. 6, plus 2 NTS observers. NTS, National Tax Service. The same agency that had been running surveillance on his financial operations for 8 months. The same agency that his mother had just told him had been guided there through 3 intermediaries over 18 months by Jang Tae-sung. It was not coincidence. None of tonight was coincidence. It was a sequence, and he was only now seeing all of it laid out. The gala, Haerin's contact with Neela, the fabricated document, and now this. Taesung had not been reacting to tonight. He had built tonight, every element of it, timed and stacked, designed to hit from multiple directions simultaneously so that wherever Kang Jae turned to address one fire, two more were already burning behind him. Stall them, Kang Jae said. Legal basis, document request. They need a court order for emergency inspection of sealed commercial cargo. Make them produce it on site. Buy me 2 hours. They have the order. Of course they did. Then get our lawyers there now. All of them. Nobody opens those containers without CO legal counsel physically present. You understand me? Yes, sir. He hung up and sat in the parked car outside Haerin's building for exactly 4 seconds. The amount of time he permitted himself to absorb the full scope of what was happening. And then he called his head of security. I need you to find Tae-sung, he said when the call connected. Not to move on him. Find him. I want to know where he is in the next 30 minutes. Understood. He started the car. He drove toward Neela's hotel. He knew which one because his mother had mentioned it 3 weeks ago in the same conversation where she'd said she is coming back. A small detail, a location dropped without apparent significance that he now understood had been placed deliberately, a coordinate held in reserve for exactly this kind of moment. His mother thought 14 moves ahead. He had always known this intellectually. Tonight he was feeling it in real time. The city at 5:20 a.m. was the city at its most honest. No performance, no traffic, no social maintenance. Just concrete and light and the occasional vehicle moving through emptied streets with the particular purposefulness of people who are awake before dawn because they have to be. Kang Jae drove fast, but not recklessly. Both hands on the wheel, jaw set, eyes tracking the road and the mirrors in alternation. His phone rang. Security. He's at the syndicate's Mapo office building, the voice said. Arrived 40 minutes ago. He has 6 men with him, and a pause that carried weight. He has Park Do-hyun with him. Kang Jae's foot came off the accelerator for a moment. Just a moment. Park Do-hyun was the Eastern Port Operations Director's immediate deputy, the man who controlled day-to-day logistics at the Incheon facility, the man whose access codes were needed to document what was in containers 7, 12, and 19. He was with Tae-sung at the Mapo office at 5 a.m. on the night of the customs inspection. Kang Jae pressed the accelerator back down. Stay on them, he said. I want movement updates every 10 minutes. If they leave the building, I want to know before the elevator reaches the ground floor. He hung up and called his mother for the 3rd time in 90 minutes. Tae-sung has Park Do-hyun, he said without preamble. A silence that was not surprise. The silence of a woman who has just had a piece of her own calculation confirmed. Then the containers are already compromised. He fed the manifest to NTS. Yes, through Do-hyun. That would be the mechanism. A pause. Kang Jae, the containers, whatever is found in them tonight, is going to create a criminal exposure that is very difficult to manage from outside a courtroom. You need to understand that. I know. The syndicate's legitimate holdings can be separated. I have been structuring for this for 18 months, but it requires... Mother, his voice was level and very quiet. I need you to listen to me. I'm going to Nyla's hotel. I'm going to tell her everything. Whatever happens with the Incheon facility tonight, whatever Tae-sung has built, whatever the legal exposure looks like by morning, none of that changes what she deserves to know. And I need... He stopped. The next part was harder than he'd expected to say. I need you to understand that I am not going there to fix my situation. I'm going there because it is the right thing to do, regardless of my situation. The line was quiet for a long moment. I know that, his mother said. Her voice was different, lower, less structured. The voice she used when she was not managing anything, which was rare enough to be notable. I've known you your whole life. I know when you're making a calculation and when you're not. A pause. Go. He drove. Attorney Shin-ji Young answered his call on the 4th ring with the voice of someone who had not been asleep. Mr. Seo? I need to speak with Nyla, tonight, now. I have information about Jang Tae-sung that she needs before morning, and I have a fabricated financial document that he intends to use to damage both of us. And I need... He caught himself, slowed down. I am asking, not demanding. I am asking you to give her the option. A pause. He could hear her breathing, the small sounds of a person making a rapid professional assessment. Where are you? She said. 7 minutes from the Shilla Hotel. I'll call you back in 3 minutes. She hung up. He drove. The Namsan Tower was visible on his left, lit against the dark sky, the city spreading below it in its grid of light. 2 minutes and 40 seconds later, his phone rang. Room 1412, Attorney Shin said. I'll be present. You have 30 minutes and you will not raise your voice. Understood. And Mr. Seo? Her voice dropped a fraction. She agreed to see you. That was her choice, not my recommendation. Don't mistake the access for anything more than what it is. I won't. Nyla answered the door herself. She had changed out of the midnight gold gown. She was wearing dark trousers and a loose cream shirt, her locks down from the pinned arrangement at the gala, and she looked not smaller, not more vulnerable, but more real. The gala version of Nyla had been armor, beautifully constructed and deliberately worn. This version was the woman underneath the armor, which was considerably more frightening to stand in front of because there was nothing between him and the full weight of her attention. She looked at him for a moment without speaking. Then she stepped aside. He walked in. The suite was lit with 2 lamps, warm light, and Attorney Shin was seated at the small table near the window with a legal pad and a pen and the expression of a woman who has built a career on being the most prepared person in any room she enters. The sitting area had a sofa and 2 chairs. Nyla sat in one of the chairs. Kang Jae sat on the sofa across from her. He did not take off his jacket. He reached into it and removed the fabricated document and placed it on the coffee table between them. Tae-sung made this, he said. He has someone inside my financial compliance office who can generate documents on CO letterhead. This is structured to look like a payoff, from a CO holding company to an account in your name 6 weeks after you left. He was going to have Hae-rin deliver it to you as part of her testimony about the fire. The confession was going to be real. This part was the knife inside it. Nyla looked at the document. She did not touch it. Her face was doing the thing he recognized, the stillness that was held in place by will. But something else was there too, a quality of alertness that told him she had not been asleep when he called, that she had been awake and already thinking about things adjacent to what he had just placed in front of her. I know about Tae-sung, she said. He looked at her. Not everything, she said. But your mother, we've talked over the years. She didn't tell me the full picture, but she told me enough to know that what happened the night of the fire wasn't that there were people who wanted me gone. Her jaw moved slightly. I've known for about a year. The room was quiet. You've known, he said slowly, for a year. That someone engineered the circumstances. Yes. Her voice was level, controlled in the way of a woman who has had a long time to process something and has done the work. I didn't know the specifics. I didn't know it was Tae-sung or how far back it went. But I knew that Hae-rin didn't act alone, and I knew... She stopped. Something moved across her face. I knew you were not the man I saw that night. I knew that wasn't... Another stop. Harder. I knew your failure was real. The things you felt. The insecurity, that was real. I'm not taking that away from you, but the fire itself, I knew someone helped it happen. Kang Jae sat with this for a moment. And you built everything anyway, he said. Yes. Knowing. Her eyes were steady on his, dark and absolutely direct and carrying 4 years of a life he hadn't witnessed. Because it didn't matter. Whether it was orchestrated or not, you stood there. You said what you said. You let me walk out. A pause. The knowledge of Tae-sung doesn't change what you chose. It just explains the conditions you chose inside of. He absorbed that. She was right. She was precisely, surgically right. And the fact that she had arrived at this understanding alone, over 4 years, without anyone walking her through it, was so entirely characteristic of her that it hit him with the force of something he had almost forgotten and was now being reminded of at considerable volume. I came to tell you about the document, he said, and about the Incheon facility. Tae-sung is moving against the syndicate's operations tonight. There's a customs inspection in progress, and NTS is on site, and he has people inside my logistics chain. Mom, eat isam. He paused. I'm telling you because it will be in the news by morning, and I don't want you to read it without context. And because your company, if there's any financial structure connecting NYLA Studio to the Jeonju Trust, you need your lawyers looking at it tonight. Nyla glanced at Attorney Shin. Something passed between them. A look that carried the compressed information of people who have had a version of this conversation before. We're already on it, Attorney Shin said. Of course they were. There's one more thing, Kang Jae said. He looked at Nyla directly. She held it. I went to Heirin tonight, he said. She told me what she did. All of it. She's willing to give a full statement. The fire, the arrangement with Tae-sung, the fabricated document. She's going to lose everything when this comes out. She knows that. A pause. She told me she didn't know you were carrying triplets, that she didn't think about what they would become. He held Nyla's gaze. I told her their names. Something shifted in Nyla's face. Not softness exactly. Something more complicated than softness. A kind of involuntary response that got through her control before her control could catch it, and which she did not try to conceal once it had arrived. She looked away, toward the window. The sky outside was beginning, barely, at the very edge, to shift from black toward something that might eventually become blue. The children are asleep, she said. It was not quite a non sequitur. It was the kind of thing you say when you need to say something true and grounding. And the truest, most grounding thing available is the location of your children. I know, he said, though he hadn't known, and the knowing hit him fresh. Ji-hoon woke up twice last night, she said, still looking at the window. He does that when he's in a new place, new sounds. Ji-woo has to have her water cup exactly where she can reach it, or she panics. Ji-an, a pause. Ji-an is the one who watches everything. She doesn't miss anything. She saw your face tonight at the gala. She asked me in the car who you were. His hands were flat on his knees. He didn't move them. What did you tell her? He said. Nyla turned back from the window. Her face, when she looked at him, was the most undefended he had seen it since she had stood in the doorway of a ruined room 4 years ago with a wedding ring in her hand. I told her you were someone I used to know, she said, and that I would explain more when she was older. A pause. She said, Is he going to explain himself to you first? Nyla's mouth moved at the corner. Not quite a smile, something more specific than a smile. She's 3 years old. She has your instincts, he said. Yes. The not-quite smile held for a moment. Then it faded, and what replaced it was something sober and clear-eyed. Kang Jae, what you've told me tonight, I'm glad to have it. I mean that. The document, Tae-sung, the full picture, I'm glad. A pause. But I need you to understand something. Tell me, I did not come back to Seoul for you. I didn't bring my children to that gala for you to see them. I came back because I built something real, and it deserved a real stage, and Seoul Fashion Week was that stage. The timing, she gestured slightly. The timing put you in the room. I knew it would. I thought about it. I decided I was done letting the possibility of you in a room change what I did with my life. He stopped. That's right. That's exactly right. I know it is. I'm not here to ask you to change that. Then what are you here for? The question landed in the room with its full weight. Attorney Shin's pen was not moving. The lamps threw warm light across the sitting area. Outside, Seoul was beginning its slow return to daytime. Kang Jae sat forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped, the posture of a man who has stopped managing his appearance and is simply occupying the space he is in. I'm here because my children are asleep 40 feet from where I'm sitting, he said, and I have never heard them breathe. I have never been in the same building as them while they slept. I have never... His voice did not break. He had not come here to break, but it thinned in a way that was audible and that he did not try to conceal. I am here because I want to be someone they can know, not someone they should have known, someone they actually know. And I understand that is your decision. I understand it will be slow. I understand I have no leverage and no claim and no right to anything except what you choose to give. A pause. I'm here to say I understand that, and to say it to your face, not through a lawyer. Nyla looked at him for a long time. long enough that the not looking away became its own kind of answer, though not yet to the question he'd asked. My lawyer will contact yours, she said finally, about a structure for contact, if that's what you want. It is. It will be slow. I know. And if you use your children as leverage in whatever is happening with Tae-sung and the syndicate, if they become part of your public narrative, if their faces are in the media cycle around this, they won't be. If they are, she said very quietly, very clearly, you will never see them again. I will make that happen, and I will not feel guilty about it for a single second. Do you understand me? Yes, he said. I understand you. She nodded. Once, the nod of a woman closing a negotiation on her own terms. Then her phone lit up on the chair's arm beside her. She looked at it, and something changed in her face, a sharpening, the professional alertness snapping back in like a current being restored. It's my financial director, she said. She looked at Attorney Shin. The Jeonju Trust. There's a problem. Shin was already on her feet. Nyla stood. The sitting area suddenly had the quality of a room where a different kind of meeting was beginning. She looked at Kang Jae briefly, not dismissing him, just reconfiguring, the way a person reconfigures when the emergency shifts location. You should go, she said. Whatever is happening with your operation tonight, you need to be in front of it. He stood. He picked up the fabricated document from the coffee table. Nyla. He said her name the way he had said it at the gala. Level, no performance in it. Just her name, said by someone who had been not saying it for 4 years and found it, even now, the most solid thing in the room. Whatever happens with Tae-sung tonight, I need you to know that his play against the syndicate was always secondary. The primary target was always the two of us. He needed us permanently separated. He needed me to be the man you thought I was. A pause. He failed at that part. Mossad says, Botnag. She looked at him, something in her eyes that he couldn't name and didn't try to. Go, she said. Not unkindly, he went. The call from his security chief came before he reached the elevator. Tae-sung left the Mapo building, the voice said. 6 minutes ago, all 6 men with him. They're heading toward Hanam-dong. Hanam-dong. Hae-ren's building. Kang Jae hit the elevator button. How far out? 4 minutes. Maybe 3. He was 14 minutes from Hanam-dong. He had told Hae-ren to call a lawyer. He had not told her to leave the building. He had not considered, and this was a failure of the kind that happened when too many fires were burning simultaneously, that Tae-sung's surveillance on the building would have flagged his visit, and that Tae-sung, who was already in motion tonight and had already committed to the full scope of his play, would not wait to find out what Kang Jae and Hae-ren had discussed. He hit the button again, useless, and then took the stairs. Get someone to that building now, he said into the phone, moving fast down the stairwell, the sound of his footsteps sharp and hard against concrete. Do not let Tae-sung's men reach her floor. I don't care what it takes. We're 12 minutes out minimum. 12 minutes. Tae-sung 3 minutes. He hit the ground floor door open with his shoulder and crossed the lobby at a run, and came out into the pre-dawn cold with his keys already in his hand, and the full weight of everything that had been constructed against him tonight pressing from all directions simultaneously. The containers, the NTS, the fabricated document, Do-hyun, and now Hae-ren, the one person who could walk into a room and dismantle Tae-sung's version of the last 4 years with her own testimony, unprotected and alone in a Hanam-dong apartment that Tae-sung had had eyes on all night. He got in the car. He drove. The streets at 5:40 a.m. were empty enough that he could move at a speed that was considerably beyond legal. And he moved at that speed without internal debate because the calculus was simple, and he had always been, under the management and the control and the cultivated stillness. A man capable of the simple calculus when everything else fell away. His phone was ringing on the seat beside him. 3 different numbers in rotation. His lawyer, the port operations director, his mother. He did not answer. He drove with both hands on the wheel and his eyes on the road and the Namsan tunnel swallowing him whole and spitting him out the other side into the orange glow of Hanam-dong's main approach. And he could see the high-rise from 2 blocks out, lit against the breaking sky. And he was counting seconds and running the numbers, and the numbers were not. He made it in 4 minutes and 11 seconds. He knew the exact count because he had been running it in his head the entire drive, the way his mind ran numbers when his body was already committed to a course of action, and the only variable remaining was whether the math was going to work out. 4 minutes, 11 seconds from the Shilla Hotel's underground exit to the curb outside Hayrin's building, which meant he arrived with somewhere between 40 seconds and 2 minutes to spare depending on how accurately his security chief had read Tae-sung's travel time. He found out it was closer to 40 seconds. Tae-sung's cars, 2 of them, black, the same fleet vehicles the syndicate used for operations that required deniability, were pulling into the building's underground entrance as Kong Jae came through the main lobby doors from the street. He did not take the elevator. He took the stairs again, moving fast and quiet in the way of a man who spent his 20s learning how to move through spaces that were not safe. And he came out on the 14th floor with his shoulder against the stairwell door and his breath controlled and his eyes already scanning the corridor. Empty. He moved to 1412, Hayrin's apartment, and knocked. 3 times, fast. A pause. Then the door opened and Hayrin's face appeared in the gap, and her eyes went immediately past him to the corridor behind him, and he saw the fear there, real and unperformed, the fear of someone who had spent the time since his departure doing the calculation she should have done before she called him. "They're in the building," he said. "I know. The security desk called up." She had dressed. Dark clothes, hair pulled back, a bag on the sofa behind her that told him she had been in the process of deciding whether to run. How much time? 40 seconds? Maybe less. Is there a service exit on this floor? End of the corridor left. Take the bag. Go. She looked at him. You're not coming. I'm not running from Tae-sung in my own city. He said it without heat. Just a fact, the way facts sounded when they had been decided in advance. The service exit takes you to the building's secondary lobby. There's a convenience store on the corner. Go there, stay inside, call attorney Shin, tell her where you are. Kang Jae, go, now. She went. He watched her move down the corridor toward the service exit, quick and low-heeled and without looking back, and then he turned and faced the elevator bank at the corridor's other end and waited. The elevator opened 20 seconds later. Tae-sung walked out with 2 men flanking him and 2 more behind, and he stopped when he saw Kong Jae standing in the corridor outside Hayrin's open apartment door. And for a moment, a single, very still moment, the 2 men looked at each other across 15 feet of hotel-grade carpet and the 30 years that lived inside that distance. Tae-sung looked older than he had at the gala 6 hours ago. Or perhaps Kong Jae was simply looking at him differently. Without the film of familiarity that had been coding his vision for 3 decades, the film that made you see the face you knew rather than the face that was actually there. Without it, what he saw was a man in his 40s who was tired in the specific way of people who have been maintaining a performance for so long that the maintenance itself had become exhausting, and who had made the decision at some point, not tonight, not recently, but years ago, to let the exhaustion make him reckless. She's not here, Kang Jae said. Tae-sung looked at the open door, then back at Kong Jae. You got here fast. I drove fast. Where is she? Somewhere you won't find her tonight. He kept his hands at his sides, visible, the specific posture that communicated to the 4 men in the corridor that there was no weapon and no plan to make this physical. Not because he couldn't, but because physical was not the language this conversation needed to happen in. Call your men off, Tae-sung. This is between us. Tae-sung looked at him for a moment. Then he made a small gesture, and the 4 men shifted back toward the elevator, not leaving but repositioning, giving the corridor the shape of a private conversation. Tae-sung walked forward until he was 6 feet away, close enough that Kong Jae could see that his eyes were bloodshot, and his collar was open under his jacket, and the composure he was wearing had the stretched quality of something that had been maintained past its natural limit. You read the documentation, Tae-sung said. All of it. Then you know I have been planning this for 4 years. You know the positions I have inside your operations. You know that what happened at Incheon tonight is not recoverable without my cooperation, because the NTS observers have a chain of evidence that goes back 18 months, and every link in that chain runs through your name. His voice was even, professional. The voice of a man presenting a negotiation he believes he has already won. I don't want to destroy you. I want the Eastern Port Holdings and the 3 financial subsidiaries. I want a clean transfer, documented as a voluntary restructuring, and I want it done in a way that leaves you with enough legitimate business to not spend the rest of your life in a courtroom. Kang Jae looked at him. That's what you want? He said. That's what this has always been about. The dress, Kang Jae said, the fire, Nyla, the children she raised alone for 4 years. He kept his voice the same temperature it had been all night, level even, giving nothing away. That was all just collateral. In your accounting, something moved in Taesung's face. Brief. I needed you isolated. A man with a stable family is anchored. You would never have let me move freely inside the operations if I had what I was supposed to have. Kang Jae's voice did not rise. It simply became more precise. So you took it. 4 years ago, you positioned a woman inside my house and let her burn my wife's work, and you watched me fall apart. And you did nothing. For 4 years, you sat across from me at tables and ate my food and advised me and looked me in the face, and you knew what you had done. Taesung's jaw tightened. It was business. She was 6 months pregnant. I didn't know. You knew. The 2 words landed in the corridor without noise, without volume, with only the weight of absolute certainty behind them. You knew everything about my household. You had access to everything. Don't insult me with that. Taesung was quiet for a moment. The honesty of it, of being seen fully, past the performance, past the 30 years of practiced warmth, passed across his face in a way that was briefly, unexpectedly human. Not remorse. Something older and less recoverable than remorse. The face of a man looking at the thing he actually is when you remove everything he has layered over it. The transfer, he said. That's the way through this. For both of us. No, Kang Jae said. A pause. The NTS evidence is fabricated. Some of it. Enough of it. Kang Jae reached into his jacket and removed his phone and held up the screen. A message from his mother, sent 11 minutes ago, 3 words. Compliance officer identified. My mother has been building a counterfile on you for 18 months. The compliance officer who generated your documents inside my financial office has been cooperating with her legal team for 6 weeks. The fabricated wire transfer you gave Hae Rin has already been flagged to 3 forensic accountants who will testify to its construction. He put the phone back. You built something very careful, Taesung. You built it over years, and you were patient and you were smart. But you built it inside a house that my mother has been walking through the whole time. The corridor was very quiet. Taesung's face had gone still in the way of a man running numbers that are not resolving in his favor. Hae Rin's testimony, Kang Jae continued, covers the fire, your arrangement with her, and the fabricated document. She is, at this moment, with an attorney who will have a formal statement prepared by morning. The statement covers your role in the Incheon operation as well, because you were not careful enough about what you said to her, and she has a very good memory. He paused. And the 3 financial officers who spoke to my mother will be providing documented testimony about the Eastern restructuring that will take the NTS evidence you built and reframe every piece of it inside its actual context. Taesung looked at him, the bloodshot eyes, the stretched composure, the face of a man who has just watched a structure he spent 4 years building begin to come down around him in real time. You can't move all of that before morning, he said. It was not quite a statement. It had the quality of a thing you say when you are hoping to be contradicted. My mother has been moving it for 6 weeks, Kang Jae said. She was waiting for tonight, for you to commit fully, so there was no room for you to claim misunderstanding or restructure your position. A pause. She knew you would move against the Incheon operation when Nyla came back. She knew Nyla coming back would panic you. She's known you for 40 years, Taesung. She knew exactly what you would do. The silence in the corridor lasted a long time. One of the men near the elevator shifted his weight. Taesung looked at the floor, briefly. A single downward glance, the duration of a breath. And when he looked back up, something had settled in his face. Not defeat exactly. The thing that comes after the argument against defeat runs out. What happens now? He said. You call your men off the Incheon facility. Tonight. You remove Do-hyun from the logistics chain and you document his cooperation with your operation in writing, signed tonight. Kang Jae's voice had not changed temperature or volume through any of this. It remained what it had been, the voice of someone who has already made every decision and is simply narrating the results. In the morning, you will meet with my legal team and my mother's team, and you will provide a full accounting of every action you have taken against the syndicate's operations and against my family over the past 4 years. All of it. In exchange for that cooperation, the criminal referral will reflect that cooperation. You will not walk away from this without consequence, but you will walk away. Tae-sung was quiet for a moment. And if I don't? Then my mother's documentation goes to the prosecutor's office tonight. All of it, with no cooperation credit attached to your name. A pause. You'll spend the rest of your middle age in a courtroom arguing about a fire that burned a dress. The thing that moved across Tae-sung's face at that last sentence was the closest thing to genuine pain that Kang Jae had seen from him all night. Not because of the legal consequence, because of the reduction of it. 4 years of careful architecture, of patient manipulation, of 30 years of learned proximity and its strategic exploitation, reduced to the story of a man who helped burn a pregnant woman's dress because he was afraid of how stable her husband's life was becoming. That was the story. That was all it was. All right, Tae-sung said. He took out his phone. He called the Incheon facility contact. He said 4 words, "Stand down, leave now," and hung up. Then he looked at Kang Jae one more time, and in that look there was something that had no name and did not need one. The look exchanged between 2 people who have known each other for 30 years and are now completing the last act of that knowing. And then he turned and walked back to the elevator with his men, and the doors closed and the corridor was empty. Kang Jae stood in silence for a moment. Then he called his mother. "It's done," he said. "I know. I have eyes on the building." A pause. "Hye-rin is at the corner store. My people are with her. Get her somewhere safe tonight. A hotel under a name that isn't hers. Her statement needs to be clean and uncontested." "Already arranged." His mother paused again. A longer pause. The kind that carries something other than information. Kang Jae. "Yes. Come home. Sleep a few hours. Whatever comes next, it will still be there." He looked at the open door of Hye-rin's empty apartment, the white sofa, the glass-topped coffee table where he had set the fabricated document, and then picked it up again. The life of a woman who had made a catastrophic choice years ago and had been living inside the consequences ever since, a life that was about to become considerably more public and considerably more difficult, and which she was facing alone because the man who had used her had discarded her, and the man she had helped harm had told her to call a lawyer instead of leaving her to face it without warning. He pulled the door closed. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. Look, the legal proceedings against Jang Tae-sung took 7 months. His cooperation, once given, was thorough in the way of a man who understood that the only remaining currency he had was the quality of what he provided. He gave names, dates, financial routing structures, and the identity of every official who had been cultivated inside the NTS surveillance operation. He gave it all with the same professional precision he had brought to everything else he had done. And the prosecutors noted in their filings that he was one of the most organized cooperating witnesses they had processed in a decade, which struck Kang Jae, when he read it, as the most Tae-sung thing that had ever been written about Tae-sung. Yoon Hae-rin's testimony was delivered in a deposition room on a Tuesday morning in February. Attorney Shin was present. Kang Jae was not. Hae-rin had requested that he not be, and he had agreed without argument because there was nothing in that room that he needed to witness, and there were things Hae-rin needed to say that would be easier to say without his face in her eyeline. The deposition ran 4 hours. Her attorney negotiated a settlement that stripped her of the Busan distribution stake and required 3 years of supervised financial reporting. She kept her apartment. She lost most of the rest. Kang Jae did not feel satisfaction about this. He did not feel much about it at all, which was its own kind of information. The signal that something he had been carrying without fully knowing he was carrying it had been set down somewhere along the way, and the lightness where it had been was still new enough to be noticeable. The Incheon operations exposure was contained. Not perfectly. Nothing is contained perfectly when NTS observers have been on site and documentation exists. But the counter-evidence his mother had been building reframed enough of the narrative that the criminal exposure landed on Du Hyun, who had been making decisions with direct operational authority and whose cooperation with Tae-sung was thoroughly documented, rather than on Kang Jae himself. The syndicate's Eastern port holdings were restructured. Legitimately, this time, or more legitimately, which was not the same thing, but was the direction available from where he was standing. Madame Seo Mi-yeon watched all of this from her house in Seongbuk-dong and said very little about any of it, which was how she expressed approval. Then, the first supervised visit happened on a Saturday morning in March. 6 weeks after Attorney Shin's office and Kang Jae's legal team had finished drafting a 12-page contact agreement that covered scheduling, communication protocols, emergency procedures, and 4 pages of conditions that Kang Jae had read with complete attention and signed without requesting a single amendment. Nyla had chosen a park, a public place, open, populated with families and children, and the specific ambient noise of a Saturday morning in early spring. The light was pale and the trees were beginning, and the children arrived in a vehicle he didn't recognize, driven by someone he assumed was household staff, and they came down the path toward the bench where he was sitting with their coats in different colors and their faces carrying the alert, assessing look of children arriving at a situation that has been explained to them in terms they are still processing. He stood up when he saw them. Jiwoo looked at him the way her mother looked at everything. Straight on, nothing deflected. Jian, slightly smaller, stood a half step behind and watched him with eyes that moved across his face in a systematic way that reminded him so precisely of the way his own mind processed new information that it stopped his breath briefly. Ji-hoon was pulling slightly at the hand of the staff member and looking at the trees and then at Kang Jae and then at the trees again, oscillating between curiosity and the comfortable inattention of a small boy in a park on a Saturday. The staff member released their hands and stepped back to the agreed distance. Kang Jae crouched down, eye level, the posture of a man who understood without being told that he was not a large adult in the presence of small children, but a person requesting access to other persons who had not yet decided what they thought of him. "Hi," he said. Jiwoo looked at him. "You were at the fashion show," she said. Direct, her mother's cadence exactly. "Yes," he said. "Mama knows you." "She does. We knew each other a long time ago." Jian had not spoken. She was still doing the systematic reading of his face, and he let her do it, staying still, not performing warmth or attempting to accelerate anything. Ji-hoon had found a stick near the path and was examining it with the focused interest of a 3-year-old who has discovered that sticks exist. "What's your name?" Jiwoo said. "Kang Jae," he said. "You can call me that." She considered this. "That's a hard name. It is a little. I can say it." She said it. Correctly, precisely, with the particular confidence of a child who has decided a thing is possible and has immediately proven it. He felt something move in his chest that he did not try to name or manage. He just let it be there. Jian spoke for the first time. Her voice was quieter than her sister's, lower, more considered. "Are you going to come back?" she said. "Or is this the only time?" He looked at her. She looked back. 3 years old and asking the question that mattered, the one that cut through everything peripheral and landed on the single point of actual consequence. "I'm going to come back," he said, "every week, if your mama says it's okay. And I'm going to keep coming back for as long as you'll let me." Jian absorbed this. The systematic eyes moved across his face once more, checking something, and then she gave a small, decisive nod. Not forgiveness, not welcome, but provisional acceptance, the kind that says, "I have noted this and I will be watching to see if it is true." Ji-hoon appeared at his shoulder from nowhere, stick in hand, and held it out. Kang Jae looked at the stick. He looked at the boy. "For me?" he said. Ji-hoon nodded gravely. He took the stick. He held it the way you hold something that has been given to you by someone who does not yet fully understand value, but has decided on some uncomplicated instinct that giving was the right thing to do in this moment. "Thank you," he said. Ji-hoon looked at him for a moment with his father's dark eyes in a face that was otherwise entirely its own, and then he turned and ran toward a cluster of pigeons near the path, with the absolute physical commitment of a 3-year-old for whom pigeons are currently more pressing than any human interaction. Jiwoo watched her brother, then looked back at Kang Jae. "He does that," she said. He runs at things. I noticed. It's a little embarrassing. He almost smiled. He held it back, not because it wasn't genuine, but because it felt like something that should arrive in its own time. He'll grow out of it. Mama says that too. They sat on the bench together, Kangjae, Jiwoo, and Jian, who had settled beside her sister with her small hands in her lap, and watched Ji-hoon pursue pigeons that scattered and regathered with the practiced indifference of urban birds who had been pursued by small children before and would be pursued again. The park moved around them, families and strollers and a dog on an extendable lead, and the pale spring light through trees that were just beginning to mean it. It was the most ordinary Saturday morning Kangjae had spent in years. It was, without question or contest, the best one. Nyla was not at the park. This had been her condition and his agreement, and it was, he understood, correct. This first meeting needed to belong to the children, not to the unresolved weight of everything between their parents. And Nyla was precise enough about her children's well-being to know that her presence would have changed the quality of the air in a way that was not fair to anyone. He saw her 3 weeks later, not at the park. At a coffee meeting arranged through attorneys that both of them understood was not about coffee. The cafe she had chosen was in Mapo, not near either of their residences, the deliberate neutrality of a location chosen to belong to neither. She was there when he arrived, already seated, a cup in front of her that she had not been drinking. She looked well. This was not a polite assessment. It was a factual one. She looked like a woman whose life had settled into a shape that fit her. Not perfectly. Nothing fit perfectly, but adequately and honestly, and with enough room in it for the things that mattered. She wore no gold today. A dark green coat and simple clothes, and her locks pinned up with less ceremony than the gala version, and more than the hotel room version, which put her somewhere in between the armor and the self, in the territory where people actually live. He sat down. "They told me about the stick," she said. He looked at her. "Ji-hoon. He told me he gave you a stick and you kept it." She looked at him with an expression that was complicated in more directions than he could track simultaneously. "Did you?" "It's on my kitchen counter." Something moved across her face. She looked down at her cup for a moment, then back up. "Jian asked me if you were a good person," she said. "What did you tell her?" "I told her you were a person who was trying to be better, that those two things are different, and that the second one matters more." She paused. She said, "How do you know he's trying?" "I told her you signed a 12-page document without changing a single word." A pause that had something in it that was not quite humor but was adjacent to it. She said that sounded boring but probably good. He absorbed that. The extraordinary reasonableness of his 3-year-old daughter's assessment of him landed with more accuracy than most things that had been said to him by adults in the past several months. "She's right," he said. "She usually is." Nyla wrapped both hands around her cup. "The gown collection debuts in Paris in May. The midnight gold line, the one I wore to the gala, is the centerpiece." A pause. "I've been working on it for 2 years. It started as..." She stopped. "It started as something I needed to make, to replace something. I know what it started as." She looked at him. The directness that had always been her default mode, unchanged, perhaps intensified. 4 years of building something from nothing, doing whatever. 4 years of building something from nothing does to the quality of a person's attention. "Your mother is going to the Paris show," she said. "I know." She asked if she could bring the children. "I know that too." A pause. "I said yes." He nodded. Said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the nod didn't say better. "Kangjae." She said his name the way she used to say it. Not performing it, not deploying it, just using it the way you use the name of someone you have known long enough that the name has become ordinary, which is the most valuable thing a name can become. What happened 4 years ago? All of it. Taesung, Haerin, the fire, everything your mother's documentation showed. She paused. "I have thought about it a great deal. About how much of what I experienced was engineered and how much of it was real." Another pause. "I've decided that the distinction matters less than I thought it would." He waited. "What was real," she said, "was that you were afraid, that you let the fear make you passive when I needed you to move, that you said 4 words that told me exactly what you believed about the value of what I made." She held his gaze. Taesung didn't put those words in your mouth. Heyrin didn't write them. They were yours. Yes, he said. And also what was real, she continued, is that I built something, 4 years of something real and complete and mine. And my children are healthy, and they are extraordinary, and they know exactly who they are, and that happened because I chose to build instead of collapse. She paused. Taesung tried to use my exit as a weapon. What he didn't account for was that leaving was the best thing that could have happened to me. She said it without bitterness. That was the thing. There was no performance of strength in it, no edge that required a wound underneath it to be sharp. She said it the way you state a fact you have fully integrated, a fact that has stopped being painful, not because the pain was avoided, but because it was moved through completely. I know, he said. I'm not reconciling with you, she said clearly. I want you to understand that. What we are building, a structure for the children, a communication that doesn't run entirely through lawyers, the possibility that one day they can have both of us in a room without it being a formal event. That is what I'm interested in. Not what we were. I understand. Do you want something different? He considered the question honestly, the way he had been practicing considering things, without the management layer, without the calculation of what the answer was supposed to be. I want what's best for them, he said. I think what's best for them is a father who is present and consistent and earns their trust over time. I think the version of that which is also best for you is the one where I stay in my lane and don't make your life more complicated than it already is. He paused. Whatever I want beyond that, it doesn't belong in this conversation. She looked at him for a long moment. The cafe moved around them, the ordinary commerce of a Tuesday morning, coffee and conversations, and people with nowhere particular to be. Okay, she said. Not warm, not cold. The word of a woman who has heard something and found it adequate, which, from Nyla Brooks, was its own form of high praise. She picked up her cup. He ordered coffee he would actually drink this time. They sat in the Mapo Cafe for 40 minutes and talked about the children. Jian's obsession with learning the names of things, everything. She wanted to know what everything was called. Ji Woo's opinions, which were numerous and thoroughly held. Ji Hoon's relationship with the physical world, which was essentially a love affair conducted through running at it. They talked about the Paris show, and the legal timeline and the custody structure that attorney Shin was finalizing. They talked the way two people talk when they are building something careful and new from materials that are complicated and real. When she stood to leave, she put on her dark green coat and wrapped her scarf and picked up her bag, and she paused at the table for a moment. The mansion, she said. I heard you transferred it to the Children's Trust. Yes. Your mother told me what you did with the gown room. A pause. The closet. He had rebuilt it. Full renovation, new shelving, new lighting, warm, the color of afternoon sun. And at its center, on a display frame he had commissioned from a craftsman in Insadong who worked in reclaimed wood, a gold gown. Not Nyla's. Not a copy of the one that had burned. A new gown that he had commissioned from Inoile's studio through proper channels, anonymously, paying full market price, and which had arrived 6 months ago in a garment box that he had opened alone in the kitchen and carried upstairs and hung in the rebuilt closet and looked at for a long time before he closed the door. He had not told her about it. He had assumed, if she wanted to know, she would find out. She had found out. It's their house, he said. When they're old enough to want it, it should have something in it worth keeping. Nyla looked at him. She looked at him the same way Jian had looked at him in the park, systematically, thoroughly, checking something that only she could see the metric for. Then she said, Come to Ji-hoon's birthday. 4 weeks. It's at the house in Gyeongbuk-dong, the one I bought last year. Just family. She paused. Your mother is coming. The children know who you are now. It won't... Another pause. It won't be strange for them if you're there. He did not say what the invitation meant to him. He understood that naming it would have changed its weight in a way that served him rather than what was actually being offered, and he was trying very hard these days to notice the difference. I'll be there, he said. She nodded. She walked to the door. She did not look back, which was also characteristic and also correct. Nyla Brooks did not look back at things she had already decided about. She moved forward, and she kept moving, and the door opened, and the street received her, and she was gone. He sat with his coffee for a moment. He thought about a Tuesday morning in November 4 years ago, and a hallway, and a fire, and 4 words he had said because he was afraid. He thought about the size of the distance between who he had been in that hallway and who he was required to become. He thought about the fact that the distance was measurable not in intention or regret, but only in what he actually did, consistently, over time, which was the only unit of measurement Nyla had ever used for anything, and which he had finally, at 41 years old, understood was the only one that was real. He finished the coffee, he put on his jacket. He left the cafe and walked out into the March morning, which was cold and clear in the specific way of Korean early spring, the sky a pale blue that would deepen by noon. And he stood on the Mapo pavement for a moment with his hands in his pockets and thought about a birthday party in 4 weeks and 3 children who would be 4 years old and a park bench and a stick that was currently sitting on his kitchen counter. He thought about what it cost to become someone worth knowing. He thought about how the cost, when you finally stopped arguing with it, turned out to be exactly what you had. He walked toward the car. Behind him, in the cafe window, his empty cup sat on the table in the morning light. The small, ordinary evidence of a man who had, this time, drunk what was in front of him instead of leaving it untouched. It was not forgiveness. It was not the restoration of what had been lost. It was a Tuesday morning in March, and a birthday in 4 weeks, and 3 children learning a name they had not always known, saying it with the ease of familiarity that accumulates, slowly and without ceremony, 1 week at a time. It was a chance. And for a man who had once stood in a hallway and watched something irreplaceable burn, who had let 4 words cost him everything that mattered, a chance was not a small thing. A chance, offered by someone who had no obligation to offer it, and every reason not to, who had built herself from the ashes of what he'd failed to protect, and had come back not for him, but for herself, and had decided, with full information and open eyes, to leave a door not closed. A chance was the most extraordinary thing in the world. He got in the car. He drove home. In the kitchen, on the counter, a small, ordinary stick sat in a glass of water. Ji-hoon's first gift. The beginning of something that had no name yet, that would take years to name, that was being built 1 hour per week in a park in early spring by a man learning, late and imperfectly and with everything he had left, how to be worthy of the people who had decided, against all reasonable odds, to let him try.